Hi everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Today I have a review for you. This, at long last, is Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is the 5th edition book that I have anticipated more than any other 5th edition book since the 3 core books came out, and I'm very excited to have it in my hands at last. We're going to be taking a deep dive into it, and I'll be telling you what I think, so let's get down to it. Alright, so here we have it. This is Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Explore a wealth of new rules options for players and dungeon masters in this supplement for the world's greatest role-playing game. On the backside here, we've got a little description of what this is. Xanathar here is the crime lord, a beholder, and is known to hoard information on friend and foe alike. He catalogs lore about adventures and ponders methods to thwart them. His twisted mind imagines that he can eventually record everything. So Xanathar is kind of a control freak, and there is his friendly fish. Let's see. Silgar. Yes, because the disclaimer here says, no goldfish were harmed in the making of this book, especially not Silgar. Silgar definitely did not die because we forgot to change his water. If you see Xanathar, make sure it knows that. Be perfectly clear that Silgar was not harmed, and that we had nothing to do with it. Better yet, don't bring it up, and don't mention us. So, clever little disclaimer as usual. The cover's really nice. I really like it. It is absolutely beautiful. This book does retail for $49.95. The special cover, the limited edition cover, or whatever they call it, the alternative cover, at my local game shop was $89.95, so I said no thank you to that. Kind of outrageous. I'm not sure if they're upcharging or not, but I just got the standard edition for this one, $49.95. And I think it's worth it. I really like it so far. So you got the credits here. You've got the table of contents, which has the Chapter 1, Chapter 2, and Chapter 3. And then Appendix A and B are the sections here. Chapter 1 is all the character options. Tons and tons of character options, all the way from page 7 to 273. And then you've got Chapter 2, Dungeon Master Tools, which is also over 70 pages of the book. And then you've got the spells. And as we open up to the introduction here, you notice we have Xanathar and his goldfish, and we have all these little notes, flavor text from Xanathar himself. What's that, Silgar? No, not yet, my fishy friend. They just got here. Perhaps after we chat a bit. I find a little conversation at the beginning helps digestion. So the intro here describes what this book is for. It's basically just extra tools for players and dungeon masters. A lot of it is based on Unearthed Arcana, which is a monthly, maybe? Or bi-monthly? I don't know. A column they put out, a PDF, free PDF they put out on their website, Wizards of the Coast, that is. That has some new things for people to try. New character options, some new rules options, and things like that. And now... And now that people have had a chance to try some of that stuff in the form of Unearthed Arcana, they now have refined it based on feedback they've gotten from people and released it in this book. Now, there is quite a lot of stuff that never showed up in Unearthed Arcana, and a lot of the stuff that did show up in Unearthed Arcana has been refined and changed and tweaked quite a bit. So these are 10 rules to remember. These are some common things that people got confused about, essentially, in the core rules. And so they're clarifying some things here, which is really helpful. Beautiful art throughout the book, as is standard for Wizards of the Coast's 5e books. As we get into Chapter 1 here, you can see the subclasses for each class. You've got 3 for Barbarian, 3 for Bard, 2 for Cleric, 2 for Druid, 3 for Fighter, 3 for Monk, 2 Paladin, 3 Ranger, 4 Rogue, 3 Sorcerer rather, 2 Warlock, and 1 Wizard. So these are subclasses. These are like the archetypes. So some of them, a lot of them when you get to 3rd level, you get to choose that. That seems like most of them. But some of them at 1st or 2nd, you do get to choose your, cleric domain at 1st level, your sorcerer bloodline at 1st level as well. So there are some of those things. But yeah, they do give a little description available here so you can understand the basics of what each one does. And overall, they're really good. I can't speak much to the balance of these, to be honest with you. I haven't tried playing them. I haven't DM'd games where players have tried them. So, and my mind just doesn't generally work in the way of fine-tuning and balance and making everything perfect anyway. So, yeah, they seem cool. I'll say that. They do seem really cool. There's some awesome options. I've played quite a bit of Cleric before, and I really like the Forge domain. Sounds pretty awesome. There's some other ones that definitely are appealing to me. I would say that if you are fairly new to D&D 5e, this is absolutely something that you probably want to wait on unless you got $50 to burn. Get used to the rules. Play a lot of the classes, explore different options, and then if you're feeling like, okay, I've been playing D&D pretty heavily for a year or two, I would love to explore some different character options now than what I've had available to me. This is a great book for expanding what you have already in the core rules. So yeah, for each class, you've got a little bit of kind of background stuff, like what is the heraldic sign of your fighter in this case? Who is your instructor? And what is your signature style? And these things are really just for flavor. They're not going to make a mechanical difference for the most part, but they are things that DM can use. Samurai for fighter, that's pretty cool. So then you've got, for monk, you've got what is your monastery like? What is your monastic icon? And who was your master? So there's all these different things, and then they get into the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different archetypes, different subclasses for that class. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Some of these options at the beginning can really fit well with any class, and you can mix and match a bit. It's something like View of the World. These are generally from a ranger perspective, but could be used for any class, really. Same with Homeland or Sworn Enemy. There's definitely some things that you can mix and match in the first section. Obviously, once you get into the actual subclasses, those are specific to that class. There's 4 roguish archetypes I mentioned. So there is the Swashbuckler, Mastermind, Inquisitive, and Scout. Wonderful pictures. I really like that mask. So cool. Really cool looking. Yeah, lots of great art throughout, and it's nice that they did include a picture of each archetype. So those are the subclasses, and yeah, overall, I think they're really cool. They look great, and I can't wait to try some of them out. Then, this is still part of Chapter 1. This is your life. This is a lot of backstory stuff. Roll tables for figuring out a more detailed backstory than what the backgrounds in 5th edition will give you. The emphasis here is on ideas, not rules. You're not going to get any mechanical benefit from these background traits and backstory features. It's just for flavor, to help you role play better. And I'm kind of torn on that. I can see this being useful, and I have looked up stuff like this for players before. There was a Pathfinder book, I think it was Ultimate Campaign, I'm not totally sure, that had a lot of this sort of stuff, even more than this. It was like super detailed. I remember we spent with a game group once like 20 minutes just rolling this stuff up and writing it down. And this has a lot of detail, but not as much as that. It's got plenty for me. I don't honestly know if I'll use this that much because I'm sort of a fan of discovering my character as I play. And coming in with an incredibly detailed background, especially if it's developed in isolation, I think is not the best way to go. However, sometimes I've had players who really struggle with roleplay and really struggle to separate themselves from the character and realize that, no, you're not just playing what you want to do as if it's a video game. Rather, try to inhabit this character and actually roleplay. I have found that for players like that, it can be helpful to develop this. And I would say maybe one thing at a time even. Maybe this session, let's roll for your family. And then next session, let's roll for how you became the class you are. I became a cleric because... Or what was a significant life event? Or what's an adventure that you went on? And stuff like that. So, yeah, I think that is maybe a good way to go. I'm glad they have the tools here. I don't know if I'll use it a whole lot for myself. Then you've got some racial feats as well. So these are feats, like you had feats in the core rules, except now they are specific to certain races. And they seem cool. They seem pretty similar in the way they work to the other feats, which is good. So just a couple pages of those, and then you get into Chapter 2, the Dungeon Master's Tools. So I will say, I think that the inclusion of a lot of stuff for players is really nice here. We haven't seen all that many books that are useful for D&D players. Most of the books, and it makes sense, I understand why, are great for Dungeon Masters. Dungeon Masters are usually the ones buying books anyway. But it is good to recognize that, hey, we want to give a lot of player tools too. In the Dungeon Master's Tools section here in Chapter 2, we get a lot of rules clarifications and rules expansions. Maybe they're things that were just left pretty unclear in the original, and now they're providing some clarification. Maybe things that were easily exploited or ruled inconsistently on, and providing some additional rules to help kind of shore some of those things up and enhance the game and enhance the simulation. And then there are also some things like tool proficiencies that were not very impactful in the core rules, and they're adding some rules to help make them a little more attractive in terms of players pursuing them. So here is that section on tools and skills and how you can use tools and skills together, and then a little more detail on the actual toolkits to kind of expand those rules and make it more clear and useful. Then they've got some stuff on spell casting, perceiving a caster at work. How can players perceive that? How can players possibly identify a spell that has been cast? Invalid spell targets, area of effects on grid, so different options for understanding and representing the area of effect of a spell. And then there's this section on encounter building, which personally I don't find all that useful. I mean, maybe I will. Maybe once I sit down and actually start designing encounters sometime soon, I will use this. But as I start reading over it, it just gets really complex. I tend to kind of wing it, guys, and just kind of say, oh, that's a CR3 monster, and I'll work it out. And that gives me enough of an idea that I can figure something out. In the introduction to this section, they really do recognize the idea that this is not an exact science. You really do have to assess your party. You have to assess these characters and understand what is their max damage, what are their special abilities and spells that can make an encounter much more easy than I expect or much more difficult. But there is some good guidance here that expands and kind of represents things a little bit differently than the XP budget system that was in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and certainly gets more detail than just the challenge rating system. Still, I don't see myself using it too much. I see myself winging it a lot more than using this. And I'm really glad there's tools out there like the Goblinoid Encounter Planner, I think it's called, that is just really handy for planning encounters. Then you've got these roll tables for random encounters that are broken down by the terrain or environment. So Arctic encounters, coastal encounters, levels 1 through 4. Now, one of my problems with this is there's a huge variety. You know, 2d10 merfolk could, for example, rolling for that, could give me 2 merfolk, or it could give me 20 merfolk. And that can be a big difference. They do recognize that sometimes, hey, if you roll too crazy, your players are going to want to sneak by this encounter. Your players probably are going to want to run away. But still, anyway, it's interesting. I think overall it's not a big problem, and it can be easily adjusted. And it is nice to have these tables where if I know my party's in a certain kind of environment, I have a wide variety of options for encounters for them. And they do point out that not all of these encounters have to be combat encounters once again, but actually a lot of them could be good role-playing encounters and might require some thinking outside the box, which I think is great. Traps. I like that they give you more traps. I'm really bad at building traps myself, and half the time I run the traps that are written in the books incorrectly, so I can always use more thinking about traps. I've done a lot of just Googling of traps and looking for stuff online and seeing what other people are talking about. But I always appreciate having more options for traps, as well as some rules for designing simple traps. So these are all pretty simple traps. Note on making traps meaningful here, they really emphasize that you don't want to overuse traps. You don't want to go into a game of D&D and have your players constantly paranoid that you are going to use traps. So use them in a manner that is few and far between, and then really catch your players off guard with them, and don't make it all about them being overly cautious unless that's your preferred style of play. Personally, not for me. I like my players to go about their business and once in a while deal with a trap. They also have this bit on complex traps, which, these traps are almost more like a boss encounter, really, in the form of a trap, this path of blades. These are often like full room traps. So yeah, this is a pretty huge description of this trap here. And then you've got the Sphere of Crushing Doom. You've got the Poisoned Tempest trap here. And then you've got this bit about designing your own complex traps. Downtime rules are something I really appreciated in Unearthed Arcana. It was released as a PDF, I don't know, about 6-8 months ago. Maybe, actually, probably more like a year ago now. They did change some of it and refine some of it. I think the section on Rivals was called Foils before. And overall, it looks like it's they organized it a little bit better in terms of having these rule tables and such. Some example downtime activities. And yeah, this is something that I think is a big game changer when you are running a campaign. Considering how you do downtime can really make a big impact, because it's important to understand that the game is much more than just about the combat. The game is so much about developing a character. And what is your character doing in the time between adventures? One thing I really liked about Adventures in Middle-earth, actually, the fellowship phase. So yeah, lots of good stuff. You got gambling, crime, pit fighting, relaxation, religious service, research, magic. Yeah. So anyway, really cool stuff. Not so useful if you're doing one-shots or shorter mini campaigns, but especially in a long-term campaign. That stuff can make a big difference. I really appreciate that inclusion. Awarding magic items. I have heard some criticism of 5th edition from people who really liked 3.5 or Pathfinder, that, you know, magic items in general just aren't as well developed in this, and that's true. 5th edition just puts less emphasis on magic items and does not assume that players are going to be accumulating a lot of magic weapons. But they do include some more expanded thoughts for including magic weapons in a campaign here. And I really like this. This is common magic items. These are magic items that are not all that mechanically powerful, but are very, very interesting. And I just absolutely love them. I can't get enough of these. The Dread Helm. This fearsome steel helm makes your eyes glow red while you wear it. Clothes of Mending. This elegant outfit of traveler's clothes magically mends itself to counteract daily wear and tear. Probably my favorite item is the Mystery Key. A question mark is worked into the head of this key. The key has a 5% chance of unlocking any lock into which it's inserted. Once it unlocks something, the key disappears. I absolutely love that. Really cool. Just something that can make a campaign very interesting. I can imagine players trying this key on all sorts of locks and, you know, finally, eventually getting it to work on one. And yeah, I think that's really awesome. Smoldering Armor. Wisps of harmless, odorless smoke rise from this armor while it is worn. The Tankard of Sobriety. You can drink as much as you want and remain sober. Oh, man. So there's just some really interesting stuff here. A Wand of Scowls. This wand has 3 charges. While holding it, you can use an action to expend one of its charges and target a humanoid you can see within 30 feet of you. The target must succeed on a DC 10 Charisma saving throw or be forced to scowl for 1 minute. Oh, man. That's so good. On a 1, the wand transforms into a Wand of Smiles. Oh, man. Okay. So, yeah, that's good stuff. All right, and then they have these magic item tables. These compile magic items from the DMG, I believe, as well as this book, into some tables now, which I thought they were organized this way in the DMG, but then I went back and looked and realized, oh, no, they're not. They're kind of broken down by section. So here's your section on wands, here's your section on armor, here's your section on magical weapons, here's your section on magical rings, etc. And whereas this just organizes them by how common they are. And that's really nice. I appreciate that. I think maybe it was something that should have been done in the DMG, but it is nice to have it here. And then we get to Chapter 3, Spells. So this just expands the spell list from 5th edition. So you've got a bunch of spells for each class. And overall, I was impressed with how many there are here. There's a good amount. We've got page 150 all the way to 171 here. So quite a few spells, and they are organized in the same manner as they are in the player's handbook, meaning they have each class's spells full list here of the additional spells organized by level, and then throughout the rest, they have the full descriptions of the spells in alphabetical order. And so there's always a little bit of kind of going back and forth there. One reason I really appreciate the spellbook cards, actually. Another good consideration they write in here is that maybe you want to consider not overwhelming your players by saying, here's a whole bunch of new spells to pick from, especially if you have someone who can pick any spells from the whole spell list, like a cleric. Including all these spells, especially with a new player, just gives them more and more choices that can feel a little bit overwhelming. So it might be good to kind of pepper them in Or you could even have, you know, for wizard spells, have your wizard find a spell book that has a couple of them, a couple of new ones that they'd never heard of before, make them as loot. I think that's a really cool way of handling it. But overall, I read through them, and yeah, there's some really good stuff. There seems to be a pretty good mix of spells that will be very useful in combat and are just obviously mechanically useful, along with some spells that might require a little creativity and aren't as clearly and obviously useful, but do some really cool and interesting things. Tiny Servant is an interesting one. You can basically make some inanimate object into your Tiny Servant. So here they have a tankard of ale that has now become a Tiny Servant. I love it. All right, Appendix A is all about shared campaigns, and this is a pretty interesting section. It kind of gets at the idea of a West Marshes campaign, which I believe Matt Colville talked about in a video. That's where I first heard of it. And it's not quite the same as that, but it talks about how you can have rotating DMs and players rotating in as well, and how you can still keep a campaign going with the recognition that sometimes it's hard to get the same consistent group of people to show up to the table every single time. And that's one of the real problems with getting a D&D group going, right? So yeah, it has some considerations for how to do that, and overall I think it's well done. Appendix B has character names here, and at first I was kind of like, oh, interesting, I don't really want all these names, but as I started reading through them, I realized I really do like these. Yeah, I really do like them. I appreciate having them. There's some that are broken down by race, and then you have, you know, male, female. Some of them have like a clan name, for example, Dragonborn clan, or some of them do have elf child, for example, dwarven clan. For human names, they break them down into real world nationalities, you know, Arabic, Chinese, Celtic, Egyptian, etc., German, English, so yeah, Norse. I thought that was kind of an interesting choice. That at first I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Give us fantasy names, right? But I actually really do appreciate it now, because I realized that, yeah, you know, elves in someone's world might have sort of a Mesoamerican feel, for example, or you know, the dwarves might be more Norse in nature in someone's world, and it enables them to kind of have a certain flavor for those races, not just humans, but also can be just for humans. And you can have different regions that are represented by different names and different languages and kind of have a different flavor to them. So overall, I think that's pretty cool. And I will definitely be using these. I think that the name generator on the Dungeon Master screen was not great. I think that it's hard to make a name generator, in my opinion, that actually works well. I did generate some names that way, and sometimes they actually sounded okay, but for the most part, they weren't all that good and needed a lot of tweaking. So that is Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So to wrap this thing up here, is Xanathar's Guide to Everything everything we could have hoped for? Personally, I think it is. I think the book really delivers in a major way. It takes a lot of the best stuff from Unearthed Arcana over the last couple years, refines it, puts it all in one book, and adds a whole lot of other really neat stuff too that will be useful for both DMs and for players. I think that if D&D 5th edition is your game, you are not going to want to miss Xanathar's Guide to Everything. I'd love to hear from you. If you own the book as well, I'd like to hear what you think. Put that down in the comments below. If you have any questions for me, put those down there as well. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. Make sure you're subscribed, and everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.